went back to teaching. I got into special education. I worked in a hospital, maximum security hospital for the criminally insane. And I was very comfortable in that environment and did really, really well. And we haven't talked about much about that, but
teaching. You were teaching in a hospital?
I was teaching in a hospital. The state required education to be offered to anybody under 21. And then there was adult basic education, give them something to do while they're in the hospital. And the only thing I'll say about this is that my particular unit reduced its violent incidence to 0. And patients were applying to come on our unit.
In the incidents in the hospital?
Yes, yeah, and it was a maximum security hospital. There were some people that had done some awful things, but all of them were deemed, at least temporarily, in need of mental health services. And we worked in an interdisciplinary team on each unit, and it was a dangerous place. I mean, there were guards, but we were treatment people, and so we didn't. So what we did there is create a peaceful environment on our unit of 20 patients.
Connect this for me.
Yeah.
And you did mention in the notes that we took before this, you did mention a kind of amazing incident that occurred there that is probably worth including in this. But before we get to that, just sort of connect that for me, that experience of working in that kind of an environment with those folks and being able to, bring about a peaceful environment with the later transformative theme that developed when you were in the world of mediation.
To be around people who are deemed, judged, appear to be mentally ill, that's the sensitization that I appreciate having. We walk amongst the population, and we see mentally ill people all the time now because we did deinstitutionalized the mentally ill. They're amongst us, but even amongst the deemed happy or mentally sane people, there's gradations of ability and momentary lapses where my gosh, he's acting strange. So whatever. So my comfort level in this extreme environment was I was tested, and I thrived in that environment. And I think the patients taught me, to be with them. They were really normal people in ordinary circumstances. They got out of ordinary circumstances, and most of them committed some crimes, and some of them some awful, awful crimes. And yet, if you create an environment for them where they have 3 squares and they sleep every night, and they're in a safe place from their voices or from whatever in their lives, they come out and they look pretty normal. So there we are. We're interacting with normal people now, for the most part, yet they have the recognition of what they've done. They have to live with what they've done. Now, there is a mentally ill state where there's no conscience that we can determine. That's an exception to the rest of these folks that are here, that are human beings with feelings, consciences. They understand what they've done. They know they did it. They don't understand why they did it. They don't understand how they could do it. And so, being with those people, we treated them until they were deemed not guilty by reason of insanity, and then they came back to us and we provided treatment, housed them and provided treatment. If we helped restore them to competency so they could go to trial, which was another charge we had, then they left us. They went to trial. We never saw them again, unless they're not guilty by reason of insanity, if that was their defense. That was the usual. In this one case, the man restored to competency, went to trial, but he was brought back to the hospital every day after the trial. And that was unusual. So we got used to being with him while he was going through his trial. And that was a trauma for him because he had to see it all over again and hear it from the survivors. He was then convicted of murder, and he still came back. I mean, we felt like, well, now he's convicted. He's not a patient anymore. He needs to be in jail because that's where he's going. But he was brought back here during his sentencing phase. And once he was sentenced to death, we were really comforted to know that he wasn't going to come back to us, but he did. That was a new experience for us, and I had not been around somebody who the state was about to execute. And we know it takes years before that actually happens, but he lived with the knowledge of what he did, clearly what he did, and that he was now going to be put to death. And at one point during this time, after he knew what was going to happen to him, I was talking to him, and he was crying. I don't know what he was crying about, but I held him, my arm around him, as he cried and talked, and cried and talked. And he eventually went to jail, and within 3 months he had killed himself. What I think I got from that experience with him was that he was a human being. What he had done was deemed a crime, and the state, in all their wisdom, decided that he needed to be killed by us. Yet he was a human being who had feelings, and I was with him. My job, what I needed to do as another human being with him, is to listen to him. Just be with him. Clearly, I didn't know what he was experiencing. There's no way I can relate to it, except feel this mass pain because of what he had done, and know that he must be in pain. You know, it's so vague, general, yet I'm a human being. I can experience that. And I was with him, and I held him while he listened, while he cried and talked, and that was my role. And I think there is a place for that, to be able to for anybody to be afforded the opportunity to be listened to, for whatever it's worth, even if they only have 3 more months to live, or a couple of years or whatever, even after he's done what he's done. There's a place in society as human beings to be with each other as long as we're human beings.
When I hear you talk about these things, and I've heard you talk about them over the years, different incident stories, and now we're putting them into sort of a context of where did that happen and where was it in the arc of your life and your work, that it's there are these things that just are like striking and you know, almost beyond being commented on.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
but that's my job here,
Yeah.
is to
Yeah, I know.
offer some sort of comment. And one thing that occurs to me to say there, again, building on, you're like, what kind of resource are you developing through all this, or what kind of resource is sustaining you through all this, which may or may not relate to the work that you ultimately have done that brought us together. There's your language there shifts a little bit from listening and being quiet. I'm thinking back to the story of the young man who told you about his uncle being lynched, to the conversations that you had in the dorms, to, you know, listening to the conversations that you weren't part of, you were excluded from. So there's an ability to sort of stand quietly, to be quiet, to listen, and to not judge. And the other thing that occurs to me that I hear in this recollection I almost don't want to call, I don't want to call it a story. It's not a story. It's a recollection of a real experience, is to just be present. There's nothing else you can do, really.
Right.
You weren't in a teaching role. You weren't, supplying any new knowledge or information or anything. You weren't listening. I mean, you were listening, but there's listening to something that's being said, and then there's just being there. And again, I think it's a phrase that I remember you using in the past, sort of being there, being with people without judgment. And that's almost a manifestation in real life terms of that phrase, being with people without judgment. So what value does that have, really? Just being there. So what? And what kind of an activity is it anyway? So the being there, the presence, there was something that he got from you. It wasn't your comment, it wasn't your advice, it wasn't your information. It was your presence, your human presence. And you were somehow able to offer him that, to give him that, right? And the most supportive thing you could do for him, seemingly, at that particular point, was that. There wasn't anything else. And the implication is that it did give him something. It helped him, get through the night, etc. So that's like a new element that's sort of, I'm sure that it surfaced. It's probably part of all this other stuff that happened up until now. But now this surfaces.